Hello, everyone. Hello, we are Owlbear Odysseys. I'm Marshall. Then we
I'm
up,
JT. Hi.
up
And
there's
and
JT.
I'm Shane. Other side,
Look, it's the
Marshall.
three of us.
Marshall, you can't refer to the format of your screen because Shane's is
I'm
different.
referring it to my format. It's just
Well,
how I'm the important. No, I'm not the
he,
important
he
one.
was actually right
Uh,
about you, though. He just pointed the wrong direction for me.
hey, there we go. So today we're having a little stats discussion over pros and cons of like the three main variants for determining stats for your character in Dungeons and Dragons. The three main ones that we're going to be discussing is standard array, point buy, and rolling. Rolling does refer to just basically any of the random ideas that you have for determining your stats, but we're mainly going to just be focusing on the good old math rocks version of you rolling dice, the main one that's talked about in the player's handbook of 4d6 and drop the lowest, or as how is it actually said in the player's handbook, Shane?
Roll a six-sided die and take the
Oh,
three highest rolls.
Yeah, it's 46. Keep the highest. Keep the three highest.
Just to make sure that everyone's on the same page, standard array and point buy are also both listed in the PHB. Standard array gives you 15, 14, 13, 12, 10, and 8 to assign, and point buy gives you a set number of points that you can
27.
put towards everything, with it being worth 2 points once you get above 13, I believe.
Yeah. You have
There
27 points
are
to determine them, and they all start at 8, and you can go up to a max of 15.
Yeah, there are obviously variations to all of these. For instance, there's just rolling 3d6 for rolling, or some people for standard array, will change the actual point values. We're going to be talking about them at their simplest forms, for the most part, with variations not being taken into account.
Yep. We might do another video of that another time, but we're going to be just focusing on these three main original versions of these choices that are all talked about in the player's handbook. So, to start us off, we're going to be going into standard array pros and cons of it. I'll start it off with the main pro I really like for standard array is the simplicity of it. It's just very simplistic. It's very beginner friendly, and no one has to be worried about all these different options of like rolling and be like, oh, did I do it wrong, or how should I pay my points to
Right.
do this?
So if
You
you're
just get it.
DMing and you're trying to decide which method to use, one of the big important things to take into account is who you're playing with. If you're playing with a bunch of people who have never played D&D before, standard array is probably your best option, just because it is the easiest for a beginner to pick up.
Do you have any input, Shane?
Sure, I can come up with something real quick. I was actually thinking that comparatively to like rolling, one of the things that maybe not a big deal, but you don't have to do the math that you would for like 46 drop lowest, which it's not like it's hard math, but also I know sometimes the simplest math is the easiest to mess up.
The next one, for another pro, we kind of discussed this a little bit ahead, but is the fairness of it, or as in how it's equal starts for everyone.
Yeah, everyone
No
has the
one.
same playing field.
Yeah.
It's nice in that people are gonna add their bonuses for their racial bonuses. They're gonna once they get to a point they can get ability score improvements, whatever. But yeah, it's the same starting. It's the exact same starting stats. No one should have cause to feel like, oh man, my stats just suck so much worse than the others, because they're literally the same starting.
Another pro to put in here, and granted, this one could go either way, but we're going to count it as a pro, is that with the format that it gives you, you have to assign an 8 to one of your stats. You have to have a negative modifier. You can mitigate that by using, your racial bonus there, or, boosting that with an ASI later on. But there's no real good reason to. More than the other two methods kind of forces you to always have a dump stat, making your character a little bit more just balanced and realistic.
Kind of like bouncing off that, like having the dump stat, because I think dump stats are a lot of fun because that adds a lot of roleplay variability.
Except for con. Never dump con.
Never
Don't
dump
dump con. Oh, be careful if you do that.
If you have a negative
But
con, you did something wrong.
or if you have a negative con and then you're like, oh, am I getting magic items right off the bat? You know what magic item to choose.
No, even then, you did something wrong.
Never
You
dump
did
con.
do something. You did do something wrong because your DM will take that from you somehow. But the main thing of like having a dump stat, it's fun because you do have something that you are bad at, and your other party members could make up for that. But you can also add some fun role play, like why you're bad at it, or when you do something and you're trying to roll for it, you can like actually add that to the story and make something out of it. I enjoy that because it adds more dynamicness to the game, because if everyone's just over here like, oh, I have a 20 in all of my stats, that's just getting into like main characterness,
Yeah,
and
Then you've
that's
also done
very
something
tiring.
wrong.
it creates more realistic like people, characters that have flaws instead of just being perfect golden gods.
And it also makes it more of a like it justifies needing a party if every player has something that they're bad at that someone else covers.
Yep,
So it makes the whole party feel a little bit more cohesive.
Yeah.
exactly.
And another aspect to like we're talking about how it's pretty well balanced, not just in the dump stat being what is the expected kind of alignment of stats. This is kind of like the stat generation method that is pretty much taken into account when people who are creating monsters can calculate CR. And so
Yeah,
it makes a more rounded character. And also it's one of the big complaints that anyone who's played D&D long enough will tell you is that CR is pointless and it doesn't work.
Yep.
And I'm not going to say that it works if you use standard array, but I'm saying it's more likely to work if you have a standard array than if
It
you
works
have the
best
golden
with
gods with all
standard array.
20s.
I believe point buy also works well for CR, but it's just like there is a little bit more customizability or variability in the idea of point buy, and so I see what you're getting at. Looking at like some of the cons, it is static. You are kind of just stuck with those 6 options.
Yeah, the cons for a standard array, when you kind of think about them, they typically end up being just kind of looking at what a pro is and then seeing it from the other side. And so like it's the simplistic. That's a good thing. But the other thing is that it is, like you said, it is static. It's unchanging, and it doesn't allow for customization in this aspect of character creation.
I also just want to throw out, and this is less of a relevant con, but it is one that I think needs to be discussed. Is that the standard point array gives you 2 odd stats from the outset, your 15 and your 13. Now you can change those with your racial benefits or with feats taken later, but odd stats are just wasted points, and it forces you to take 2 of those that you then have to mitigate later. Whereas with point buy, you can build it in a way that you don't have. None of your useful stats are odd ones.
Yeah, and the thing with having 2 of them specifically is the way that we're kind of having an assumption here of the customization available, where you get to just choose racial bonuses instead of having the static ones like from the original player's handbook. The options there are +2 to a stat and +1 to a stat, or 3 plus ones. And so either one of those that you use, you're going to come up with at least one stat still being odd after the racial bonuses.
So you're always going to have at least one wasted point somewhere.
So the next thing for like a con for standard array, I can think we kind of said it. The low ceiling, it is weaker comparatively to the other 2.
It's the flip side of it being better balanced and better for CR, is that it is that way because it is weaker than some of the things that you can typically come up with.
We're not going to take the time to walk through all of the math, mostly because I don't understand it all. But rolling 46, drop the lowest on average gives you more points than the standard point array does. Now, I do want to say it's a margin. It is like 1 or 2 more points on average, but it is more.
Yep. That kind of gets into kind of like jumping a little bit ahead real quick, like into the luck base of rolling. It's a pro and a con for it. And it is just kind of where that's at. Whereas standard array, you don't have to be worried about that luck. Then looking at
Before we move on real quick, I kind of wonder, should we each disclose our biases? Like, should we talk about which one we use when we DM? Okay.
I think we can go over that at the end too.
Okay.
Let's just go over after we've gone over all the pros and cons.
Wait.
Everybody. So what we're saying is everyone should watch up until the end.
Yeah, you gotta now.
And then comment what you think we're gonna say.
You have to, because Marshall's is wild.
I have fun ones.
It gave me a migraine when I read it the first time.
It's not difficult. Well, yeah, we'll go into point buy. So the fun thing that just starts it off for pros, pro is the customization of it. Oh, I'm rolling. So I'm struggling with spelling customization.
Z-A.
Oh, gross.
Use customizable. That's better.
Z-A-B-L-E.
Oh no,
that's wrong.
It's a Z.
Spell that correctly for me. Customizable. So the idea for the customizability is that it feels a lot more like game-like. You get to choose your stats as you wish, and you get to assign them. With the 27 points that you have, to me, that's very complicated, and that's an immediate con to me. I do not like how the point system works. It is frustrating, and it's hard to understand to me, but I get it. But I think about like explaining that to new players, and them being like, wait, it's 2 points after 13? Okay.
Yeah, the customization is great. When it's needed, not all builds need that. It really does. I mentioned this before we started recording, but the point buy to me really does just feel like an optional whenever standard point array doesn't meet your needs. It doesn't feel like its own way of determining stats to me, as much as it just feels like when standard array isn't good enough. But when it isn't good enough, when you're playing a mad class like Paladin or Monk, the point buy is the best option, because you can be this goes into customization, but you can be very deliberate about where each of your points is going. You're not wasting any points. There's none that you're not getting a 10 in intelligence when you could settle for an 8. Just there are certain classes that the standard array really hurts if you play them that way.
It's funny because you can go 3 15s in your stats and 3 8s.
It is built to allow min-maxing, which is a good thing if you want to be min-maxing. And if you don't like min-maxing, then the other side of this is that there is a cost to it, because a lot of times we say min-maxing, and a lot of times that ends up just being maxing. But the way that this is set up, if you feel that it is important for your character to have, +3s in 3 of their stats, you might be able to get that, or maybe +2 +3s in 2. But you're gonna have a -1 in your other 3 stats. You're actually gonna have a min with that max, which is good for the DM who's tired of their players getting too powerful. It's like,
tired of fighting anime protagonists who are good at everything.
You got a -1 to 3 of your saving throws. Let me abuse that real quick.
Yep. If you can't tell, all 3 of us do kind of have a small bias to min-maxing. It's fun sometimes, but it can be annoying.
Part of the fun of D&D is getting all these things that you can do, and getting to feel powerful in the setting. And the thing about that is, with it being cooperative, is if there is one person who is much better at building or tries a little harder, doesn't take any of the fun options instead of all of the the best options, then you don't get to feel as powerful because Bob over there is destroying everything before I even get to go.
Bob watched too many D&D Shorts videos and has built Goku.
It makes 32
We love you,
attacks
D&D
in
Shorts.
1 round.
I'll correct you a tad, Marshall. I don't have a bias against min-maxing. I have a bias against power building, where there is no
Okay.
cost. Min-maxing really punishes min-maxing. Really, it doesn't mean anything because min-maxing is a punishment in and of itself by nature of
Yeah.
there being min. To me, this is how it should work. There should be, and there's some frustration with like above 13, it's 2 points, but that's how real life works. There should be diminishing returns at a certain point. If you go to the gym straight for a month, you'll build a lot of muscle. If you go to the gym straight for 6 months, month 6 isn't doing you as much good as month 1.
Yeah.
And so, and again, D&D is about power fantasy. It's not all about realism, but those diminishing returns they provide balance to the game.
Yep. Versus the power building when it can be real time.
Where there is no cost.
Yeah. So going into some of the cons of point buy, it's not super complicated. Like if you think about it, but you have to think about it, and I don't like having to explain that to new players.
Yeah, if you use it regularly, then yeah, you're gonna get it. You're gonna know what it is. But like even people who play D&D a lot, you're typically not going to be building new characters regularly, right? So even for veterans like us, like if we're going to go build a new character, and if we're using point buy for some reason, we're going to have to look up the rules, even though we've been playing for forever. And it's not like it's the hardest thing in the world, but it is comparatively the complicated one.
It is helpful with D&D Beyond and other things like that where it just does it for you. It does all that math for you.
Yeah, like in Baldur's Gate 3. Shout out to Baldur's Gate 3.
I will say the system feels, when you read it, it's more complicated than it is. When you actually do it, it's one of those things that once you start doing it, it makes sense. But again, you have to be aware of your party. And if you're playing with new players, point buy is just too complicated. Another con that I want to throw in here, because we talked a lot about the customization, because that is the draw of point buy. At the end of the day, rules as written, you still can't go above 15. Now, you can put 3 stats at 15. Oh, Marshall spelled stealing right. That's not a roast on Marshall. I don't know how to spell that word. I spell it wrong every time. What I was saying, with point buy, you will never be exceeding your highest stat in standard array without later considerations. So there is a limit to the customization. Like Marshall put on here, the ceilings are the same.
Yep. There is a slight difference though if you do the 315s and the 38s, like those ceilings, it's capped, but if you look at like the total number of points distributed, if you do the 315s and 38s, it's going to be 69 points for that versus the standard array is 72 points in total. So there is a difference, and that's part of the min-maxing. But there is a draw to one or the other.
Yeah, you end up with less total points regardless. Whether or not that's worth it for the 315s is up to you to decide. All right, now we get to the fun one.
The fun one. Good old math rocks. Everyone loves our math rocks. We're all, I assume almost all D&D players are a little bit of dice goblins or dice dragons, and they have a lot, especially if you've been playing for a bit.
If you've only ever played online, you may not have the math rock greed, and I feel bad for you because you need to play in person and feel the dragon horde feeling you have looking at your collection of dice.
Making a dice soup is so just like primally fun. I do want to backtrack a little bit here because math rocks are fun. Everyone loves to roll dice. I think that's the main reason D&D is so popular. But I don't think it's the primary pro. And we've kind of been putting the main pro first. The main advantage here is that it is based on luck, which makes it more like the game itself. It means that you have no idea what you're going to get, and that randomness, that lack of predictability, that can be fun.
It is.
In the real world is not balanced, and sometimes that makes the game more interesting.
It's crazy when you are rolling and you're like, holy crap, I just rolled 2 18s, sometimes 3, sometimes somehow magically 6. If someone does that, go win the lottery real quick.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
I mean,
statistically like so hard to get.
Yeah. But I mean, the first game that I ever played, the first long-term game, I had no negative stats starting off, and I had a 20 in intelligence. I was playing an artificer, so that 20 from the start was awesome.
Yeah.
And that's only possible with rolling. You cannot get a 20 to start with the other two if you're playing them rules as written. We mentioned this up earlier, but also, sorry, I'm having to type as I talk.
It's the higher points on average that you talked about earlier.
Yeah, it slightly, on average, has more points than the standard.
I can't even remember what the website was, but we were talking about making this video, and I just
I can link it in
I just like
the description on YouTube.
The difference between them statistically, and it just like immediately came up. So like if you want to look at it, the average is just like slightly better, but
Yep.
yeah, that's all we're talking about at this point.
Yeah, so the higher points on average, and then kind of with that is the fun variations. It's always going to be different.
Now this one's a little
dice,
controversial. This one's a disagreement between Marshall and I, because Marshall, and I can see the appeal of it, but there are all these things about, play Smash Brothers to determine your stats, or play Blackjack to determine your stats, or roll D20s to determine your stats. There are all of these. They're based on the concept of rolling, and they add the randomness, but there are all of these wild variations. And we've talked about this before. Marshall and I have talked about this, and we respect each other's opinions, even though mine is right. He likes these fun variations. If you're playing like a one shot, that's a real fun way to roll stats. I just don't. They are not for me. Maybe for a one shot. If we were playing more than a 3-hour one shot, I would not want to put my stats into that much limbo. So this one's a pro because some people do see it as fun, but I don't personally.
And it just depends on each person. Sometimes that can be very complex and very annoying at times, and that's also kind of a con, where there's so many rules a part of it, about part of rolling, and how many variations there are. That can be mind-boggling, especially if that is the dungeon master's main thing, or the home rules. They like always doing different ones. That can be daunting for a new player.
Yeah, especially
that can be stressful.
You're going between groups, and it's like they're different home rules in different places. This is one of the things too that like every time a game starts, someone has to go, "Hey, so how are we doing stats for this one?"
Yeah,
and honestly, you kind of never know what the DM's gonna say.
Yeah, it's another know your audience moment.
Exactly. That was just, I think, an important thing to go off of right after fun variations, but we all agreed that the first main con for rolling, or the idea of the randomness of it, is
it's also being luck based. When we were talking about this video, I told the other two, I was like, we have to have luck based in both columns because that's the main.
Because it is.
It's the main pro and it's the main con.
Yep,
it just is. If you have, someone like Marshall who has weighted dice, and someone like Shane who broke 7 mirrors when he was a child, then there's going to be such a gap between their stats, and that just makes the game less fun for the people who roll low. And honestly, if I were the one who rolled super high, that makes the game less fun for me. I don't want to be overpowered compared to the team. Now that's a personal, subjective thing, but if you have players who want it to be more of a team game, that's a lose-lose situation.
Yeah, it's kind of the thing of like, if you know that you being as powerful as your character, like as your character is gonna detract from them enjoying the game. It's a cooperative game. If your friends aren't having fun, then you're not really going to be having as much fun. That's
Exactly.
it's like the moments when you all, the moments we can all think of when we're like, it's way too early or way too late at night and we're dying laughing because someone else laughed, and like it's not even funny anymore, but we're all just dying laughing. Part of having fun playing D&D is because you're having fun with your friends. They're having fun, you're having fun, everyone's having fun together. And and on either side, if you mess that up too much, then it detracts from everyone's fun.
Yeah. The only way to win D&D is if everyone had a good time.
Yeah.
Yep.
Or be the first one to make your DM give up.
Yeah. Yeah, and so the thing we're discussing here is the opposite side of the high ceiling is that there is a very low floor to the stats. All right, one at a time.
No, low floor.
Oh,
It's the opposite of the ceiling.
low floor is
You
what
can't
I
have
mean.
a high ceiling and a low ceiling, Marshall. That's not how houses work.
That's how it works in my head.
He's talking about the first and second floor. It's completely different things now.
Exactly.
No, it's that you can get terrible stats. Hypothetically speaking, you could have a 3 in a stat.
But then sometimes you have the DM who has that extra rule where it's like, okay, you are not allowed to roll below an 8. But then that kind of takes away from the whole randomness of it. It's like, okay, so it's automatically it's a base 8.
That's the thing. It's a negative because it's something that is bad enough that most people have figured out, have had to implement things to correct for it.
And that just adds those so many rules a part of it, which can be daunting.
Yeah. Again, when we were discussing this beforehand, because Marshall had brought up, maybe that shouldn't be a con for rolling because there are ways to mitigate it. And I pointed out the fact that it needs ways to mitigate it means that there is an intrinsic problem compared to the other two. That doesn't mean I don't enjoy rolling. It's fun, but it is flawed.
We do already have so many rules, and that needs extra rules.
Yeah, I think we hit all of the points we had. We just kind of worded them differently in the moment.
I think instead of maybe so many rules, we should put so many variations, because that is the thing that you enjoy about it, Marshall.
Then the kind of like the last thing, it's kind of a part of the luck based, is the inequality of it. Some kind of like what was already mentioned. You have someone who is very unlucky, like Shane, who broke 7 mirrors. And someone like me who supposedly has weighted dice. I do or do not deny.
Both are canon
# Marshall Truther Club.
And then I love how it's an automatic assumption for luck and cheating, whereas I could have just cooked Shane's dice, so they're all bad.
I thought it was just because Shane pissed off that witch one time.
That's another thing.
I tried to apologize. She wouldn't let me.
But the whole thing about the inequality, it does, we already kind of said, it really sucks when a player has such low stats and another player has no negatives and someone else doesn't have a good positive. And they only have one stat that they're trying to focus on. If it's like a wizard and they only really want intelligence, it hurts.
Yeah.
And it isn't even just the ceiling and floor. I remember one game I played in, I got pretty good stats, and one of the other guys, I think all of his stats were between 11 and 13.
Ugh.
And it was just, he wasn't bad at anything, but he wasn't good at anything either. And he had to, adjust for it with stuff. He also had weighted dice and crit so often, so he did make up for it.
So his D20 was weighted, but not his D6s.
Yeah, exactly.
I went and added another point just because I thought of this. Rolling, and again, this is tied into everything, but the randomness of the rolling makes it a lot harder to DM for, when one of your characters is playing Superman and another one's playing Jimmy Olsen, you are either going to make a combat that kills Jimmy or a combat that does not challenge Superman.
And that's where the whole thing about the CRs calculators,
Are
like,
bogus if you're rolling stats. They're bogus
it's
anyway, but
nuts. They are very bogus already. They're already broken. But when you're going apart it with rolling, it just ruins it.
not going to be
Then
fun
for
for
two.
someone.
That's kind of the thing that JT was saying is like rolling can be a lot more fun, particularly for like shorter games.
Yeah, exactly.
Because if it doesn't really matter so much that this character be balanced, then rolling is pretty good. Or
Like
or
right
rolling
now-
with variations can also be good for a long game. I'm not saying no one should roll for a long campaign. That's not what I'm saying.
Or
Like-
for higher level games where you have more time to mitigate those differences, and if the DM's giving you magic items,
Mhm.
because the stats matter the most at level 1.
Yep.
I guess level 1 through 3, but once you have time to mitigate those differences, they'll still exist,
Mhm.
but they're a lot easier to play around.
Like right now, kind of a little bit of a shout out for our campaign right now is that we're not really focusing on the randomness of rolling. We did standard array for Heartwood Heist because standard array / point buy, and it was to kind of keep things more balanced for everyone, and so it wasn't crazy chaotic. And I would have to balance things to fit those stats for a shorter campaign that we're having.
And
That
I'll
would
just
be
go ahead and
exhausting.
I'll just go ahead and let y'all know we did the same thing for the next campaign.
Exactly.
Spoilers.
So now we have gone through all the pros and cons. We want to see some more pros and cons in the comments, but we're not done right now. We're going to go over our choices as DMs typically, and it's going to be sometimes different depending on the game. But let's start off with JT. What is your favorite type of choice for determining stats?
So my go-to for most of the time that I've been DMing is rolling 46 minus the lowest, and then if your total score is lower than the total score of the standard point array, you use that instead. I don't remember what it is off the top of my head.
72.
72. Okay. So if you roll your 46 minus the lowest 6 times and you get less than 72, you switch over to the standard point array. I will say the last time that I had people roll for stats was, I think, over a year ago at this point. And in that time, my opinion has changed, and I am a big fan of point buy at this point, just because of the reasons that we've discussed. So my go-to at this point is letting players choose between standard array and point buy, but historically I've used rolling the most.
Yep. And so what about you, Shane?
Yeah, the last campaign I ran, which was like a year ago or something now, I used the method JT was talking about. I mean, he can correct me, but I think I introduced that one to him. But maybe I didn't. It doesn't really matter. But either way, that's what I used last, and it's pretty good. It's also kind of about knowing your audience, knowing your players, and kind of being willing to trust them if someone gets insane stats or something like that.
Yep.
But
It's a dumb con.
yeah, I agree that standard array and point buy are kind of like they're a good go-to now, but I don't necessarily have a set one that I use.
Yep.
All right, go ahead, Marshall.
So Shane did introduce me to the idea of the 72. I do really like that with rolling, and thinking about it like that. I do prefer standard array and point buy for balancing reasons, because I typically do throw very difficult combats at my players, so I can balance those combats a little bit better. But my favorite is for rolling. I really do really like rolling. I like the randomness. I love all the fun variations. Uh, and I really like a special one that I kind of made. I think I made it. I don't remember seeing it. If someone else already came up with it, if y'all know anyone, shout it out in the comments. But I like 16 and 8 to be a guaranteed stat for a player, for their character. And then they roll 4d6 for the other 4 stats, and they drop the lowest of those 4. And those are their stats. I will typically add the 72 a part of that as well. If it's below 72, I will typically just let them uh, raise a stat, what I've done one time, but that hasn't really happened. It doesn't come up as much because the 16 and 8 kind of balance it out. There's a good stat already, and then there's a dumb stat. Unless they choose to put a +2 from the racial bonus into that 8 to balance it out, which I had a player do. And I typically don't let them go below 8 for when they roll the 4d6 anyway. So mine is very complicated with a lot of rules, but I enjoy it because it allows variability and it allows really strong in one stat and very weak in another. But you can change it as needed. But I did have a player roll 2 18s and then have a 16, so that was nutty. So it can get really intense, but that's also a part of rolling anyway.
I mean,
that's fine.
At the end of the day, there isn't a wrong way to roll stat or to determine stats. Do it how you and your party think will be best. But if you've watched through to the end of this video, then now you understand the pros and cons of every method, and you can make a more informed decision based on the type of campaign you're playing, the party that you're using, or the party that you're DMing for. And so you at least, like I said, there's no wrong way, but you can make the decision based on what we've given you.
Yep. Well, that's it for this video. You
Go
wanted
watch,
to say
go watch
bye?
Heartwood Heist. Go watch our other videos.
Heartwood Heist.
Heartwood Heist every first, third, and fifth Saturday at 7 p.m. Central Time. I just want to say that if you enjoyed this video, we don't have anything else on the channel like it. This is unique as of right now. But we did recently put up a video where we took a class quiz telling us which D&D classes we were, and that one was really fun, so you should check that out. It's on our YouTube channel. If you're watching on Twitch, there's a link to our channel. If you're watching on YouTube, you know how YouTube works. You can find it that way.
Okay, well, that's it. We wish you all a great rest of your day
Bye,
or
everybody.
night, whichever it is. Bye-bye.
Bye.